The first thing I noticed was the vibration of my phone on the marble counter, a tiny tremor that made the silver bracelet around my wrist tinkle. I didn't want to look, not yet. My life had been a careful balance of control, poise, and subtle victories, and I wasn't ready to let the past spill into this quiet morning. I was wearing my favorite silk blouse, the pale blush one that caught the sunlight just right, and I paused to smooth the fabric over my shoulders, feeling the contrast between this soft luxury and the cold knot in my stomach. The message was short. "We need to talk, Dad." I froze. My coffee cup, still warm in my hands, felt suddenly heavy. My father's texts had always carried a weight I couldn't shrug off, but that was before I learned to protect myself. I set the cup down and walked to the window, staring at the city skyline, the way the light bounced off glass towers. I had built my world carefully, brick by brick, far from the shadows of my childhood. Far from the house where my ribs had broken because I refused to serve my stepmother's daughter. And yet, here it was, the past, whispering, threatening to intrude. I took a deep breath, letting the scent of roasted coffee fill the room, steadying my pulse. I was Maddie Hayes now, independent, powerful, in control. And for the first time in years, I allowed myself a small, ironic smile. They had no idea who I'd become. I tapped the screen and opened the message again. I had a choice: panic, run, or face them. For now, I just stood there, letting the sun warm my shoulders, preparing to remember everything I had buried. I remember that day like it was etched into my bones, not just because of the pain, but because it was the moment I realized I had to fight for myself. I was 16, barefoot on the cold kitchen tiles, hands trembling as I held the tray of drinks. My stepmother, Veronica, was sitting at the dining table, her eyes sharp as knives, while her daughter, Chloe, lounged across from her, scrolling through her phone. "Move faster, Maddie," Veronica snapped. "Chloe's waiting." I swallowed hard, the lump in my throat threatening to choke me. I'd spent years trying to earn even a sliver of respect here, but this demand crossed a line. Not again. "No," I said, my voice small but steady. "I'm not doing it." The room went silent, and for a second I thought maybe they would let it go. Then Veronica stood, her heels clicking sharply against the tiles, her face twisting in disbelief. "You'll do as I say, or you'll regret it." I didn't move. I couldn't. And that's when the first strike hit. Pain exploded across my ribs, sharp, burning, and I fell to the floor gasping. Each blow after that was heavier than the last, echoing through my chest, leaving me breathless, humiliated, furious. Chloe watched quietly, eyes wide, while Veronica's rage felt like a storm I couldn't escape. I curled into myself, trembling, tears stinging my eyes. But amid the pain, a quiet voice whispered in my memory, my grandmother's from years before, holding me close and saying, "No one can take your fire. Keep it safe, and it will carry you further than they ever could." That memory became my anchor. When they left me in that cold, empty kitchen, I made a decision. I would not be broken. I would not be small forever. I would leave, learn, grow, and one day, I would build a life so far beyond their imagination that their cruelty would mean nothing. I sat there for a long time after they stormed off, pressing my hands to my ribs, tasting blood and salt, and letting the sting of pain fuel a quiet, burning resolve. I didn't yet know how or when, but I knew I would survive. I would rise. And in that moment, the first spark of the Maddie Hayes they'd never see coming was born. Leaving home wasn't glamorous. I stepped out of that house with nothing but a battered backpack, my grandmother's locket around my neck, and a quiet determination that the world outside would be different. College scholarships, part-time jobs, and endless nights at libraries became my new reality. I learned quickly that independence demanded sacrifice, sometimes sleep, sometimes comfort, often pride. My first mentor appeared almost by accident. Mrs. Langston, a seasoned editor at a small publishing firm, noticed me buried under stacks of manuscripts one late evening. "You've got an eye for this," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Don't waste it." Those words became a lifeline. I soaked up everything she taught me, from grammar to business strategy, but more importantly, I learned the courage to trust my own instincts. It wasn't easy. I juggled 2 part-time jobs, sleepless nights fueled by instant coffee, and the gnawing self-doubt that whispered, "You'll never be enough." There were months when I wondered if I'd ever escape the shadow of my father and stepmother, if the pain would follow me forever. But every time I remembered that kitchen, the cold tiles, the sting of broken ribs, I squared my shoulders and worked harder. That memory became both wound and weapon, a reminder that I was capable of more than they could ever imagine. Little victories started piling up. My first client, a small local magazine, paid me enough to rent a studio apartment. Then came the first profitable freelance project, followed by my own editorial column online, where my voice, once stifled, finally reached thousands. I kept the details from my family, posting only modest updates on social media, careful to appear just like any other young professional. The truth was far bigger than they could ever imagine. As the years passed, I transformed my passion into a thriving enterprise. I founded my own digital media firm, hiring a small team of talented, driven people who respected and inspired me. My office, tucked away in a sunlit loft downtown, was a far cry from the dim, oppressive rooms of my childhood home. The walls bore art I loved, the shelves held books I'd studied tirelessly, and my grandmother's locket rested on my desk, a constant reminder of the fire that had carried me here. Through it all, I never forgot who I was or what I had survived. Every email sent, every client meeting, every milestone achieved was a silent nod to the 16-year-old girl on the cold kitchen floor, trembling but unbroken. I had learned to turn pain into purpose, humiliation into strategy, and fear into fuel. And as I looked out of the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office one morning, the city stretching endlessly before me, I smiled quietly. They had no idea who I had become. And soon they would. The knock on the glass door was almost polite, but I knew exactly who it was before I turned. My father, his shoulders stiff, his tie slightly crooked, and Veronica, flawless as ever, with Chloe perched beside her, scrolling on her phone as if she owned the place. They expected a timid girl, maybe a struggling young woman, someone they could sneer at or dismiss without effort. I smiled, calm and composed, letting them step into the loft. The sunlight spilled across polished hardwood floors, glinting off the modern art I had carefully chosen. The scent of fresh coffee mixed with a faint aroma of jasmine from the potted plants by the windows. This was my world, not theirs. "Hello," I said softly, but with enough weight that their eyes flicked up to me. "I wasn't expecting you." Veronica's lips pressed into a tight line. "Maddie, you look well." Her voice faltered, unsure. They were seeing me for the first time in years, but they weren't prepared for this version of me. I gestured to the room. "You've seen my office. That's my company, right there," I said, letting my hand sweep over the space without arrogance. "Digital Haze Media. We handle some of the largest clients in the country. We just signed a deal with a nationwide brand last week." My father's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Veronica's eyes widened. Chloe's phone almost slipped from her hands. I waited, letting the silence stretch, watching the disbelief and shame curl over their faces. "And in case you're wondering," I continued, reaching for the tablet on my desk, "I'm not just the founder. I'm the CEO and majority owner. Net worth is, well, enough that I don't have to ever worry about your approval again." The truth landed hard. My father shifted, unsteady, as if the floor beneath him had disappeared. Veronica's fingers curled tightly around her purse. Chloe finally looked up, blinking, no longer scrolling, realizing that the girl she had once dismissed was now untouchable. I let them absorb it, each word a small strike of quiet justice. "I've kept this life hidden for a reason," I said, soft but unwavering. "Because I wanted to build it on my own terms, without the shadows of judgment and cruelty from this family clouding my every move.
But now you see who I am.
And I hope you finally understand the girl you thought you could break has become a woman you cannot control." My grandmother's locket lay on my desk, catching the sunlight. I touched it lightly, letting that memory of strength, love, and resilience anchor me. They couldn't take that from me. They never could. Veronica's voice was almost a whisper. Maddie, I know, I said, cutting her off gently. You see it now. And it's time we talk about how all of this can move forward. For the first time in years, I felt entirely in control, not just of this conversation, but of my past, my present, and my future. They had walked into my world expecting to intimidate me. Instead, they had met the woman they had underestimated for far too long. I leaned back in my chair, letting the sun spill across the polished desk, and watched as disbelief twisted across their faces. This was my world now, and the weight of it gave me a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I could see their regrets, their questions, their silent pleas for forgiveness, but I knew that control didn't mean vengeance. It meant boundaries, growth, and respect. I'll say this once. I began, my voice calm but firm. If any of you want to have a place in my life moving forward, it's on my terms. And yes, there are conditions. My father straightened, a flush creeping across his face. Veronica's lips pressed tightly, while Chloe, suddenly quiet, seemed to shrink into herself. I let them absorb the gravity of my words before continuing. Dad, I said, eyes steady. You need to acknowledge what you allowed to happen. You need to stop hiding behind excuses, and I want honesty, accountability, and a commitment to change. No more favoritism, no more cruelty. If you can do that, we can rebuild something real, but it starts with you owning your past. Veronica's expression softened slightly, but I didn't flinch. Veronica, I said, you need to see beyond your own ambitions. You've caused pain that cannot be erased, but you can choose to do better. That means respect for others, especially me and my decisions. No manipulation, no threats. You will support Chloe's growth without forcing her to step on someone else. Chloe looked up, wide-eyed. Me, she whispered. Yes, Chloe, I said, leaning forward, my voice gentle but unwavering. You have potential, but it won't come from entitlement or cruelty. You need to pursue your own dreams, face your failures, and understand what real effort and respect mean. I'll support you if you try, but I won't let you harm anyone to get what you think you deserve. I paused, letting my words settle. I care about family, but I refuse to bend to old patterns. Love, guidance, and opportunity are yours if you meet these conditions. Otherwise, you'll find that my world moves forward without you. There was silence, heavy with the weight of truth. I watched them wrestle with their emotions, guilt, shame, recognition, and for the first time, I felt something I hadn't in years, true power, tempered with compassion. I picked up my grandmother's locket from the desk and held it lightly. Remember this, I said softly. It's not just a piece of jewelry. It's the symbol of resilience, of strength, of choosing yourself even when others try to break you. That's the standard I live by, and it's what I expect from anyone who wants a place in my life. They nodded slowly, hesitant, but aware that the dynamic had shifted. The girl they had once thought fragile was gone. In her place stood a woman who had endured, grown, and now defined her own terms. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was leading, teaching, and protecting the future I had fought so hard to build. Weeks passed after that day, and the air between us slowly shifted. My father stopped avoiding my calls and actually asked questions, not about money or success, but about choices, about growth. Veronica began volunteering at a local mentoring program, something she had resisted before, her sharp edges softening as she faced the consequences of her actions. And Chloe started taking classes, pursuing her own projects, no longer leaning on manipulation or entitlement. I watched these changes quietly, sipping coffee in my sunlit loft, the city stretching endlessly beyond the windows. There was still tension, still the memory of the past, but it was tempered by effort and accountability. They were learning. I had learned. My grandmother's locket rested on the edge of my desk, catching the morning light. I picked it up, letting my fingers trace the tiny engravings, and smiled. That small, simple object had guided me through years of fear, pain, and self-doubt. It reminded me that resilience isn't about forgetting the hurt. It's about using it as fuel to build something stronger, brighter, and unshakable. I thought of that 16-year-old girl on the cold kitchen floor, ribs aching, pride wounded, yet stubbornly refusing to bend. She had survived, yes, but more than that, she had thrived. Every step, every decision, every victory traced back to that moment of defiance. And now, standing fully in my power, I understood the truth. I owed nothing to those who tried to break me, yet I could offer guidance to those willing to change. I straightened my silk blouse, feeling the smooth fabric against my skin, and let a quiet laugh escape me. The world outside my windows was bustling, indifferent, full of opportunity.
And so was I.
The locket warmed in my palm, a reminder of the woman I had become. A woman who had been beaten, dismissed, and underestimated. And yet, here I was unshakable, unapologetic, unstoppable. And in that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that no one could ever define me again. I survived. I rose.
And I thrived.